So I'm Tony Millette. I'm an artist slash craftsman, born and raised in Sioux Falls. And I guess as long as I'm making things with my hands, I'm happy. So
I'm Darcy Millette. I am an artist in Sioux Falls. I work primarily with painting, but I just kind of use whatever materials I can to make work.
Tony, how do you identify yourself as, you do woodworking, you do ceramics, there's a lot of like hands-on things involved and intersections, but which weighs more in your identity as an artist?
I definitely prefer clay, just as an expressive medium. It's hard to beat. I do enjoy wood, working with the woodworking projects. I've gotten better at making an income as a carpenter slash a woodworker occasionally if I'm lucky, but the material is just a little bit less flexible than clay. It's nice to be able to do a creative project and still be involved with a hands-on project, but I do prefer clay. It's just a little bit harder to pay the bills exclusively with clay.
Mm-hmm. I saw that you've actually made your own soda clay recipe. When you say that it's easier to work with clay and it's more flexible, like what was the part of the process that brought you to needing to make your own clay recipe? I didn't even know that was a thing that people did.
Experimentation is a big part of the ceramic process. My kiln's pretty small in the world of kilns. I mean, it's big enough for me, but it's small on purpose so that I can have a higher turnaround. I don't know that I've had a firing where there wasn't at least a dozen or so test pieces in there, either slips or clays or glazes, and each firing kind of leads to its own next set of questions. It's very rare for tests to work out. So yeah, the materials that you're putting into the kiln are everything. But yeah, I mean, testing is a big part of the ceramic process. It's one of the most exciting parts for me because I get to play. It's alchemy.
Talking about materials, Darcy, how do you define your art practice and the mediums that you use?
Well, I really enjoy painting, and I've gone from using oils from several years ago to using acrylic based off of my studio being attached to the house and just needing to have safer ingredients or components. I'm always switching around, going through cycles of what I want to be working on. Mm-hmm. Like currently I got into making masks, and then I started thinking, well, what if I tried to make a quilt? So currently I'm not painting, I'm playing with fabric. Yeah. And I've been inspired by some of your creations, Angela, and Aaron's stuff. You guys both work with fabric as well. But it's just about, like Tony said, experimenting and trying new things and pushing yourself as an artist. So I guess I use whatever materials I feel compelled to use.
I get a sense of your personality through your work. I don't know if that's a just statement, but I always see that you're like really drawn to nature and like organic things. Like, yes, your bird series, but even just your social media presence is so much has so much organic life to it. Can you tell me about how has that always been the case, and how do you draw that inspiration?
I really think it has always been in my work. I've done a lot of portraits of dead creatures, like going way back to undergrad, and not as like death is sad and I want to be in your face, but more as like viewing death as a transition or an omen, or like a different way to look at things. And the florals and the birds and nature, that's everything that I'm interested in as a human. Like currently if it weren't raining, I would be outside digging in the dirt, planting more and more flowers and vegetables than we have room for, but that's what I'm drawn to.
Mhm.
But you work as an artist typically inside a studio, although you're inspired mostly by nature. How do you find your inspiration to do your birds and floral and dead animals? Like, do you find a subject and then just paint it? Do you see something that inspires you? I'm just curious.
I have a very interesting, like if somebody were to pick up my phone and start scrolling through the pictures, I'd be like, why are there so many pictures of dead birds and like, weird compositions? But what I do, I spend a lot of time outside, and then when I feel inspired or I get the desire to paint or make something, I will go through those photos until something clicks. And then I'll think about how I want to represent that subject. And I will come up with like a color scheme, or it really just kind of evolves. I don't ever have like, this is what I'm going to make and this is what it's going to mean. You know, the content kind of makes itself as I go.
So it just kind of ruminates and
Right.
until it manifests itself, essentially. I'm curious about, Tony, your process as well when it comes to where do you come up with your ideas and what's giving you inspiration?
It's the process just kind of feeds itself. I'm fortunate that working as a potter, there's a certain amount of constraints that also gives me a bit of freedom. I often revisit the same forms, but it's never, I find that whenever I sit down to make something, even if I have a form in mind, but, you know, just, and I've heard it described as sketching at the wheel, kind of. I guess it would be repetitive to some, but I guess I have not gotten tired of it. But it usually starts with cups and ends with cups. I mean, it's always the functional range. And usually a smaller scale too. I like objects that you can, you know, hold in both hands, you know, and objects that you can interact with on a daily basis. Yeah, I've struggled hard to kind of give it a deeper meaning. I think an analogy I heard recently was actually with music. There was Chopin wrote these mazurkas, which were these really short 3-minute. It's like a Polish folk dance, but they're very short. And he wrote these like continuously throughout his life, and he felt that he could put the same sort of like power and energy into these 3-minute songs as like a 4-hour like opera or whatever you want to compare that to. But I really like that analogy, and I guess I would hope that in these simple everyday objects I could try to put some of that energy.
When you start your process or ever in your art practice, have you ever struggled with the idea of like form versus function, or do you think those kind of go hand in hand when you're making an object?
I mean, I have tried to break from function a little bit, but I don't know. I still kind of like that. I like the act of using them. I've definitely made some kind of chunky and awkward, like things that you had to want to drink out of, basically. It had to be an effort. I've kind of gone away from that. They're a little bit more polished these days, but every once in a while, maybe depending on what I'm listening to, I'll try and stir it up a bit. But yeah.
What are you listening to?
Yeah.
Anything and everything. I think most recently, Alakuti. This last year, I really got, well, Darcy turned me onto the Angel Olsen.
Yes.
Her new album was pretty amazing.
Yes.
I listened to a lot of Hop Along last year. and also some heavier stuff. Yeah, anything and everything really.
Do you listen to any Y Pony?
Every day, live.
Can you tell us a little bit about your music making process, Darcy?
Oh, well, that's just another outlet for experimenting and trying new things. It's totally not something I would have done normally, but my friend Amber Hansen is very persuasive, and she loves pushing me in my comfort zone. But she started the group. Formerly, it was the Overeasies when she lived in Lawrence, Kansas, and then when she moved back to South Dakota, she wanted to create another group with the 3-part harmonies and instruments. So she recruited me, and we've been working on it with Sandra Moman from Vermilion, and it's quite the process. I mean, performing art was never really something I felt like I could do, but after doing it a couple times and getting up in front of people, it's becoming a little bit easier, but it's definitely an experience. Yeah, we've been having trouble. I mean, we're not getting together. There's really no way to practice because the lag on Zoom. We tried it once and it was hilarious. But what we've been doing recently is one person will record the instruments and sing and then send it off, and then another person will add their voice and recording, and then the third person will add their voice to that recording, and we've compiled one music video.
Oh my gosh.
Yet to be released, but I think we are going to release it soon.
That's actually an amazing feat to do all that.
Yeah, and we're talking about Y Pony, and I've been thinking a lot about experimentation in your work, and I'm calling back to the mobile that you made for one of our IPSO shows, and how that kind of involved a lot of different things, from fiber and textile to an audio element. Can you tell me a little bit about that piece and how that came about? It felt like a kind of a mesh of a lot of things that you do.
We as a group, we've been talking about making a music video that involves felt dolls. So when there was a call for art for the White Ribbon show at IPSO, I didn't know what I was going to make, but I knew I wanted to make something. And I was inspired by Sherry He. She was teaching in Vermilion. She started making sausages out of felt and turning them into garlands at Amber's house. And I thought, well, that's fun. I want to make something out of felt. So then I started making dolls, Y Pony dolls. And then it just happened to be around the same time as I was trying to think of what to make for the White Ribbon show. And I decided to try to make I wanted to do something with puppets, but it didn't quite work out. So then I went to trying to come up with a different way to display my little felt Y Pony dolls, and the recording was interesting. There's this really simple device that I bought online that you just hook up to your computer and you can record a certain amount of any audio onto it. So all you have to do is push a button. It's like, when you get those greeting cards and you open it, it's like that. It's just a little tiny speaker that you can record stuff onto. So it was just like it all coming together. So that was the mobile.
Tony, I'm going to go back to something that you said way at the beginning. You mentioned defining yourself, whether more an artist or craftsman, right? What is, so to you, I guess, do you feel like your woodworking is still an artistic practice, or is it more of a,
Mm,
how do you define that?
less so. Um, yeah, and I mean, I don't, you know, craft's certainly not a dirty word in this house. Yeah, I don't mind just focusing on the craft work. Yeah, I'm perfectly content with that. But with the wood, it's harder to be expressive. Like I don't feel like there is the design to be considered, but to make like it's just a more inflexible material, and things tend to take a lot more time. I guess I like ceramics and the more immediate processes. And tend to be it's easier to be more expressive with them. I think that the ceramic work is a little bit more artistic, but even then, it's still very heavily on the process and the craft involved. And I guess I'm perfectly content with that.
Something that we've noticed in both your works, I mean, for ceramics, you do make multiples, right? You find that form, and they sort of are related, but they're all unique. And then Darcy, like some of your paintings somehow seem like multiples of the same, but there are unique touches to every single one of them. Where does that idea come from of like approaching one subject in like multiples?
I think of it as like an investigation or like a practice in mark making. Like if I am taking one reference material, like I have a picture of a flower and I set up several pieces of paper all next to each other, I can go and make a mark on each piece of paper separately and then say, oh, I like how this mark turned out. And then I can investigate why that one over the other one. And it's just kind of a learning process for me. And then it's a way for me to also work quickly without having to worry about ruining what I'm working on. Like if it doesn't work out, I could just, move on, next one. I don't know. It is very similar to Tony's process in making mugs and other things. I never really thought about the relation of that. But it's just another way to experiment.
Talking about mark making, we've been like just noticing how much Forrest, like just noticing his mark making and trying to like get circles right. And I think, I mean, I don't know if your kids are artists and are heavily into getting that right. Do you see some similarities between like how you draw and how maybe Isaac and Adele approach drawing?
I think they each have their very own unique way of doing things. They both love making work. Isaac's very prolific. He can make drawings all day, and we have boxes of his characters that he makes. They're really interesting. And Adele loves to make things out of clay, and she likes to paint. So they have, I'm sure we've influenced them or nudged them into the arts, but they definitely have their own interests and their own way of doing things.
I think we often will marvel, like, because they make so much stuff, like you don't always see it, and sometimes you'll discover something wonderful. And I think like you were saying with Forrest is like they have such an effortless, like they're not thinking consciously about what they're doing, and that just allows for some pretty amazing things to happen. And maybe that's part of the repetition too, is that if you keep doing something, but you're always looking for something, and in that repetition, it allows for some, bits of the unconscious to come out. So.
So have you been inspired by the way that they work? Has Do you think it's influenced your pieces at all, either of you?
Definitely. I've incorporated a little bit of both of their work into my own paintings. I have some of their drawings that I've taken and projected onto my painting, and then I've traced them into their, like I have some of Adele's butterflies that she drew one day in my studio, and I said, these are really beautiful. Can I put these in my painting? And so I've used them quite a bit in some of my recent works. And then Isaac goes, he's like, I made you a dead bird. I know how much you like dead birds. So he'll draw me one, and they're beautiful.
I guess I have just a couple of questions. I'm curious to know where, like, you said you collaborate intellectually, but where do you see that collaboration between your practice, both of yours, and where does it meet? Like, is it ideas? Is it just really based concepts and subject matter? Where do you think your partnership and collaboration meets or supports each other? Maybe not meets, it's more about supporting.
It's definitely about support, and sometimes we'll seek criticism from the other one, like say, what do you think about this? We've collaborated on a couple ceramic pieces. When we do custom framing for some artists and some art collectors in town, local people, and we collaborate on that process where Tony will build the frame and I will do the matting and the mounting, and then that's kind of a fun project we work on together.
Can I bring up a specific piece of work? Got this. Can you see my screen here? This piece with the cat on it. That I thought was really different from a lot of things that I've seen of yours, Tony.
That was supposed to be a collaboration with the kids, because the kids always make their little clay monsters. Like, if you come and see my kiln, they're covered in them. I mean, they like, I'll have to, like, and I don't do this lightly, but I'll have to be like, all right, I got to cut the clay off because, like, you guys are going to bury me in these clay monsters. And so I wanted to make jars and then have them make the finials. But for whatever reason, they got busy that day, and I had to make the finials. Yeah. Another Millette studio collaboration. Yep.
I think they turned out cute.
Mm-hmm.
From what I can tell, like, your practices are so much on like what feels right and what feels good, and I love that. Like, you're playing, you're experimenting and just doing things that feel right for the object. And that's something special. I think there's a lot of freedom in that.
I'm the same way with like fabric. A lot of times the fabric will inspire a work that I had no idea what I was going to do, and then I see a piece of fabric and I'm like, oh yeah, this I know what its life is going to be.
Like Swiffer shoes.
Yeah, whatever comes about.
I love those, by the way.
Those are really nice.